other media platforms. So the question is how to fight disinformation in the digital age, and the first presenter will be Ľuboš Kukliš, who is the executive director of the Slovak organization, and he also in 2018 and 2019 was the head of the working group, and now he works with the working group and presents in public events and cooperates with various events. And he speaks about disinformation and also protection of minors in the online
yes, indeed.
environment.
Hello.
So,
good afternoon.
Ďakujem for joining us. Thank you. We hope that we can put into use what you just said right away. After we will have a discussion on disinformation, so we're listening very carefully for what you have to say.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm approaching this topic, of course, from a regulatory perspective, because I'm a regulator and we've been called upon by the European Commission, as ERGA is an advisory body to the Commission, to help them to monitor the implementation of the Code of Practice on Disinformation. The Code of Practice on Disinformation is a unique instrument. It was developed in 2018, and it is a self-regulatory instrument where the signatories, mainly the platforms, the main platforms, which we can count among them, Twitter, Facebook, and Google, came together and drafted a commitment to fight disinformation. It was made under the auspices, we can say, by the European Commission. They were nudged a bit to do that, but it is a self-regulatory thing. So they were the main drafters of the commitments, and they were the main actors to implement them. Now, when I'm saying this is a unique instrument, nothing like that had been tried before. Now we see that similar instruments are being drafted and applied, for example, in Australia and other parts of the world, but at the time it was the first thing to do. Now, the Commission then needed some kind of framework, some kind of structure to follow up on the commitments and find whether these are actually working. And I turned to the media regulators gathered in European Group of Regulatory Authorities to monitor the implementation. And of course, for us, it was a new kind of task. It was nobody at that time in Europe had any competence over online space.
Mēs nedaudz esam pazaudējuši signālu. Cerams, ka Ļubošam izdosies atjaunot. So we lost the signal for a while, for let's say 20 seconds ago, and so we hope we can reconnect with you. So the change of the background a little bit.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. A few steps and we can go on again. So this is the world we live in. That's okay.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not in my traditional space where I do these kind of things, so I apologize for any technical problems that might have. So I'll try to improvise a bit, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, it's fine.
Well, and so we try to monitor the implementation of the commitments of what is written in the code, of course. Now, after that period, it was.
Oh, the connection again. We can't hear you. The picture freeze just now. If you can hear us, maybe some closer movement to the Wi-Fi router could help. That's what usually happens. So now we can see you, we cannot hear you. So we hope we will find the best spot. The background is again changing, and it's even better than the previous one.
Yeah, but at least this is a very old instrument, so hopefully somebody can enjoy it, at least that. Is this better? Do you think?
Now it works.
We have a better signal. Okay, perfect. So, after the European election, we try to see the commitments of the code. Now I will just do the basic explanation of the commitments within the code, which there are 5 pillars of them. And the first one is scrutiny of ad placements, and it is predominantly about demonetization of the placing of the ads on the websites, for example, that peddle disinformation, that are using disinformation to raise money. The second pillar was about political ads and issue-based advertising, and these were repositories of political ads that were running throughout a period of European elections, and these were the things then that users can then look at all the political ads that were running through the period and see who paid for them, which was a very useful instrument at the time. And of course, issue-based advertising is a notion of advertising that may be political in nature, but is not connected to political parties or political candidates. Then it was integrity of services, which is the protection of services from abusing them, from some shady actors using automated systems like bots, for example, to game the services, so to say. And then there was a pillar for empowering consumers, which is basically about media literacy, which is, I believe, the topic of today's conference. And then it was about the fifth pillar was about empowering the research community, which is predominantly about research on the digital platforms and about access to data on the platforms to conduct that kind of research. Now, we conducted the monitoring as far as possible. Always in this kind of exercise, the problem is lack of data, because once the transparency of data is not written in the code itself, which was not at the time, what the time I'm talking about, then it is very hard to actually measure what is happening on the platforms, what is happening in the implementation of those commitments. So more transparency was the first thing that we said after the monitoring, and that was our recommendation for the future. We asked for more data. We asked for the data in a particular structure. For example, the breakdown into particular member states is very important here, because the data, the little data that you're getting are always integrated in the larger regions, even globally. But if you're thinking about political situation and disinformation in different countries, in particular countries, this is not that much helpful. So the breakdown for those kind of data is very important. And we asked for better structure of reports that are coming about the implementation of the commitments, and of course the expansion of the scope, because it was commendable that the main platforms were the signatories of the code, but there are other actors, other services that were not, and that might be important in fighting the disinformation. So after that, the Commission issued its own assessment with also other reports feeding into it beside ours. And then COVID started, so to say. So during these times, all of us experienced a lot of disinformation pertaining health situation, and of course the COVID itself and the cures for that, and so on. And there was an additional commitment here that was made by the platforms, again on the basis of the code, to fight disinformation on COVID-19. And in the beginning of this year, the Commission asked ERGA again to try to monitor the implementation of these commitments and try to verify the data that the platforms were sending every month to the Commission. Now, again, we experienced the same problems with transparency, for example. And after that, we tried to write the recommendations, how to continue with these kind of processes. So if I can just now tell you the 5 recommendations that we set in this kind of monitoring. So the first one was to improve the provision of more granular data. Again, it is connected to transparency. Country level information, the same thing. To have a unified structure of the report that the platform presenting to the Commission every month. And to set up, for example, publicly available country level database of trustworthy and authoritative sources, because this is something that in this case, in the case of COVID and disinformation around that, were extremely needed. And then to have one-stop shop, so to say, to really, for every user to find all the rules that are connected to it. So these were our recommendations at that time. And now these were used by the Commission to set up a guidance for the new code of practice. And now we are in the middle of this process. The signatories sat down at the table and now we're drafting the new code of practice on disinformation, which can hopefully make use of the experience that we had throughout the implementation of the first one. And I would say that what we learned from the current code of practice is that this indeed can move us forward, and that the progress there might be really tangible. But to really measure the impact and have a real tangible outcomes, we also need some kind of monitoring framework and some kind and a deep kind of transparency around the data and everything that is going on the platform. Because without that, without meaningful kind of transparency, it is pretty hard to understand how the commitments are actually fulfilled. So basically, what we are we are not signatories. We are not sitting with the signatories at the table, but we are talking to them. We had 2 meetings so far where we explained our recommendations, our findings, our understanding of what should be done next to them, and through also the guidance by the Commission, we are now working with the Commission on the kind of the monitoring framework that I mentioned that can actually provide that. Now, we are again talking about self-regulatory instruments. So it is very hard to capture this in a legal manner. Well, self-regulation means that there is no kind of legislation that is coming into. But with the new Digital Services Act, probably coming in due course, of course, but now the draft is already on the table. There are intense debates around that. It can also help move us to some kind of co-regulation. It means that some basic rules around the monetary structure can be written into it. The basis is already there in the draft. We are proposing some small changes that can move us even further. But that co-regulatory model can then really provide a self-regulatory side where the signatories are drafting the commitments themselves and are using their own knowledge of their own systems in drafting and setting up those measures that really make a difference. But on the other hand, we can have a legal basis where the monitoring structure can be set up, where transparency, the meaningful transparency, can be achieved, which means that the data that the platforms can provide can be then verified and databased by the monitoring structure. And with this structure, you can actually verify and ascertain that the commitments are actually fulfilled. And I think this is the way forward. We have to think about the whole network of actors that may come in this space. And I'm talking especially not only about regulators, but about researchers, academia that can be put into it. But researchers are also gathered in other entities. It's not only academia, there are NGOs that are very useful in this sense. And we now have European Digital Media Observatory in Florence that is really gathering these people and creating the network of these people. And I think with this kind of network, we can actually really create the meaningful transparency if the signatories will be willing to work on such a framework, monitoring framework, and also with a little help from legislation to help to set up that kind of monitoring. So now I laid out the vision that we have for the next steps on the code of practice. Again, I think this is kind of instrument that can really move us forward. It inspired other similar instruments in the world, and hopefully with the help of the researchers and other actors that can come into it and put to work, we can actually establish a framework that can help us fight disinformation better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ľuboš. So far, we have a little bit of question as well. If you have some minutes, the connection
Absolutely.
is finally stable, and it was fine through all the time we had now. As we know, the platforms, they are not kind of very much willing to share data at national level. Maybe in the EU level, it works in some way, but the national level, if we talk about this, how to solve this issue? How do you think?
Well, I think there needs to be strong commitments into that, and you really need a kind of, because now it's the data that they are providing are kind of self-reporting, and in self-reporting there's always a risk that not everything will be reported accurately, of course. It can always be framed in a way that might not be helpful in the end. And of course, they are choosing the data that they will share. So that's one problem with that. So for that, we need a kind of verification, a system that would verify that data that you're getting are accurate. And of course, ideally, you will get an access to data in a way that will leave it up to the researcher or the verifying authority to look for the data that they need. Now, there are a number of ways how this can be done. One of those things is, for example, that's been already developed by a few researchers, and it's called about the transparency intermediaries or data intermediaries that can work with the platforms and with the researchers as a kind of middleman to get the data, ask for the data to the platforms that they are needed, and then safely, from mainly from GDPR perspective, safely deliver them to the researchers or required authorities. We are developing one of these ideas with my colleague Ben Wagner. We wrote a number of papers around that, and this idea is about a public authority, European-wide public authority, that can fulfill this mission. That authority would only have competence over requiring the data and handling them in a GDPR sensitive way, and then provide them, cleanse, so to say, provide them to the required authorities or researchers. And this kind of authority should be independent to a highest degree, but also have no competence over any other thing than just to handling the data themselves. So the approaches are there. EDMO, European Digital Media Observatory, I know has a working group also with platforms and researchers that is working on a GDPR protective way how to access data for researchers that can fulfill this kind of mission. So I think the approaches are there. We just need to pick one and try it. And of course, it always helps if there is a legislation around that, because then it would really can enhance the legal certainty of all the actors. And DSA is the instrument that can actually provide that.
Thank you. Thank you. Many more questions actually we can ask, but this is the time we should finish this beautiful and very deep this presentation really makes a good introduction to our next discussion. Thank you. We say to Ľuboš Kukliš. Ľuboš Kukliš ir Slovākijas audiovisuālo mediju pakalpojumu regulātora izpilddirektors un arī Eiropas raidorganizācijas.
The executive director of the Slovak Audiovisual Media Services Regulator, also chair at European Platform of Regulatory Authorities, and former chair of European Regulators Group for Audiovisual Media Services. Here it's also important to note that the Council of National Mass Media also participated in these meetings and also gave reports and information how Facebook and other social media providers are in line with their commitments.